From Kyiv, joining us, Mr. Peter Zalmayev, Director of the Euro-Asia Democracy Initiative. Journalist Michael Tracy is joining us from Munich, and here in our Tel Aviv studios, International Affairs Analyst Dan Perry, former Europe editor for the Associated Press. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for being with us here tonight. So our main topic for today, on the eve of the one-year anniversary, is the Russian invasion of Ukraine beginning its end, or simply ending its beginning?
The surprising thing to me is how little has changed in the fundamental narrative in the year that has passed. And it also is testament to dictatorship's inability to walk away from a terrible mistake. I have to say, I would expect in coming months for Russia to continue to try to make improvements to its position on the front, and then at some point maybe declare victory, and the pressure will be on Ukraine whether they accept such a thing or not. I don't know if the West will forever support Ukraine's willingness to fight on.
It comes down to the prerogatives of the United States. Fundamentally, you could talk about the resourcefulness and the valor of the Ukraine fighters all you'd like, and not to deny that exists. Yeah. But in terms of the power dynamic, it's really what the U.S. determines is going to be the final course here. And Biden, if anything, has doubled down dramatically with his trip this week and so forth to Kiev.
Okay.
Remember that Ukraine's official position is that they want the restoration of not just the areas lost in the past year, but also Crimea. I don't know whether America truly is as determined as public statements would suggest. I have to think that at the end of the day, if Russia sued for peace, they would find an interlocutor. I realize that sounds insufficiently determined to back Ukraine for some people's taste, but I think at some point, given the tremendous cost in treasure and in lives and in the strategic position of both sides here, that there will at some point come a moment where some optimal outcome might appear to not involve a return of all the areas captured by Russia.
Peter.
Yeah, let me just say that this was Henry Kissinger's formula after at first coming out with what seemed to Ukrainians as pro-Russian statements, very realpolitik statements. Henry Kissinger kind of backtracked. He talked about Ukraine being a de facto member of NATO.
Remember that Putin is a dictator. He controls the discourse largely in Russia, not just through the cowed media, but also through social media. And I have some faith in Putin's ability to use his spin machine to claim victory, even where no victory is realistically to be found.
Well, before we try to
if I could add something,
please, Michael.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. If there's any evidence that I'm unaware of that the United States, at least in the form of the president, the Secretary of State, top-ranking members of Congress, that they don't actually believe in the maximalist kind of ideological commitment that they at least avow in regard to Ukraine and the American resource investment too, please let me know, because at this point, one can really only take Joe Biden, for example, at his word when he casts the conflict as this grand, cosmic showdown between good and evil, freedom and autocracy.
I think at the same time, you can see this as a conflict between good and evil and between dictatorship and democracy and other things that are holistic, while being prepared to consider realpolitik outcomes that are, as I said, optimal. I do not take Joe Biden at his word. I don't take any politicians at their word. I certainly don't take people involved in a war situation literally when they make speeches that are clearly posturing. I think ultimately people are more flexible than you give them credit for.
Well,
and also, by the way, anyone who knows, anyone who knows history, anyone who knows history is aware of the fact that the internal borders of the Soviet Union were largely a fiction and were designed to create chaos and to create untenable minorities in countries that would then become difficult to keep together. If I were Ukraine, I wouldn't necessarily want all those areas, in fact. And if in return I'm getting EU membership, de facto NATO membership, and a tremendous embrace from the democratic world, while Russia remains probably mired in poverty and isolation for the foreseeable future, I might be thinking I won the war.
Great point. Let me just say, but that's precisely what Putin is afraid of.
Wait, gentlemen, we wanna hear both of you.
Unless there's any indication that's empirically accessible that Biden actually is taking on this practical, realist approach to the conflict rather than this grand maximalist ideological one, then the only rational thing to do is to just assume that he's actually
my empirical evidence is the entirety of history that shows the politicians' posture. I think we would have to be very, very naive to take them all at their word. That's all.
Are we heading towards a nuclear Armageddon, or is Putin just bluffing?
Putin became the first leader of the nuclear age to violate the idea that you don't actually threaten nuclear war. So I would take him at his word in this case. Look, the Armageddon scenario is if Putin decides to end the war, Ukraine refuses, and then he tries to make a point by either threatening to use nuclear weapons or maybe carrying out that threat, maybe in some limited form. And then if the U.S. or the West responds and it escalates, we may be looking at the end of days.
So a few stages away from full-on Armageddon. Peter Zalmayev, your take?
I think Vladimir Putin's speech showed complete bankruptcy of ideas. He offered nothing new. It's once again, we're seeing it's a war of the archaic against the modern. It's, he wants to continue living in the year 2022, and his this nuclear posturing in the form of abandoning this treaty. Well, it has no substance because Russia has for a while now not been adhering to this treaty, and this is part of his strategy to continue to blackmail Ukraine and its Western supporters with nuclear rhetoric.
I see no reason why the West should reevaluate its attitude towards Putin. At this point, there's not that much to be done, and the past war, other than a terrible cost wrought upon Ukraine, obviously, has not been unsuccessful from the point of view of the West. Consider how badly Russia has been hobbled. It is no longer able to wield energy blackmail upon the West. It is no longer considered a good faith player in the world economy and in diplomacy. Its military has lost any semblance of deterrence and even of a sense of competence. Russia is going to be impoverished and isolated, as I say, for a long, long time because of Putin. You know, dictators seem invulnerable and omnipotent until suddenly they're not. Like bankruptcies, collapse of dictatorial regimes happens slowly and then quickly. I wouldn't be surprised.
It's hard to believe that anyone could say that we may be approaching the end of days. That was, I think, the term used. And then not think that that might be occasion to maybe reevaluate what led to this scenario. I don't know. I think maybe if you're on the precipice of apocalypse, you might want to give a bit of a rethink as to what brought you to that point.
By the way, I just
hold on, but there's no appetite for that at all.
Michael, let me respond, since I believe I'm the one you are putting to ridicule here. I understand that we are at a terrible precipice.
Mindset in making that statement, I would say.
In fact, I'm one of the few people who actually wrote prominently and publicly that the expansion of NATO may have been a mistake. I understand that there's some dispute over whether it was promised or not promised to Yeltsin that this wouldn't happen. But I never saw that much of a reason to expand NATO, especially because membership is a less profound thing than many people think. I understand Article 5 says an attack on one is an attack on all, but it doesn't say what you do. Ukraine is being defended much as it would have been were it a member of NATO. Right. It hardly makes a difference.
Michael, yes,
so to expand NATO formally
Dan, let's allow Michael
to poke a finger in the eye of Russia.
Michael.
And that may have indeed been a mistake.
Michael Tracy, Peter Zalmayev, Dan Perry, let's hope there will not be year 2 anniversary. It seems that we're at some sort of a convenient, quote-unquote, managing the conflict state of mind here. Thank you so very much for this 2-minute break, and we're back with more.